podcast.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm host John Henson, and like last week, there is a sleeping baby behind me, so you might have to hit the music sometimes to go and get him to go back to sleep, but it's fine. Once I start talking and start telling the stories, it'll take him out. So it is December. It is Weird Fun Bag number 21, maybe a little bit shorter of an episode this week. 3 shorter stories looking at the man from Taured, the Freedomites, and our first story will be of Nellie Meunch.
Story time. Story time. Story time? Story time.
It might be Muench. It's probably Muench. Anyway, in 1931, Dr. Isaac Kelly received an urgent late-night call to go out and check on a sick child in the suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri. Well, on the way to the call, Dr. Kelly was actually abducted at gunpoint and held for ransom. Now, despite denials from the St. Louis Police Department, the ransom was actually paid, and the kidnappers told authorities where Dr. Kelly could be found, which was blindfolded and wandering down a side road outside of town. A writer from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch heard about it from the kidnappers, tracked him down, and offered to drive Kelly home in exchange for exclusive rights to the retelling of the entire ordeal, which is kind of like, that's crappy. That's a crappy thing to do. Dude has just been kidnapped and held for ransom. Probably has you don't ever expect that. I mean, his world is turned upside down in an instant. And then a journalist comes along and be like, hey, buddy, I'll take you home if you tell me everything that happened and no one else. Like, I don't know, just dumb. Anyway, Dr. Kelly did agree to this proposition and told his side of the story, which actually didn't amount to much since he had been blindfolded the whole time, couldn't see anybody, had no idea what was going on. And so because of that, this case went unsolved until 1934, when it was revealed that the perpetrator of this kidnapping had been Nellie Meunch, a prominent socialite who was married to another doctor in town, and whose brother was a Missouri Supreme Court judge. Now, I don't know what happened to the sick child that Dr. Kelly got the urgent call from. I'm guessing there wasn't really a sick child, right? Like, Nellie Meunch probably called it in, and then her kidnapping crew, intercepted him knowing where he was going. Probably, right? There was probably no sick child. Anyway, I just didn't want to leave that end loose. So, 3 years later, though, Nellie Meunch, revealed as the perpetrator of this kidnapping, prominent St. Louis socialite, married to another doctor in St. Louis, her brother a Missouri Supreme Court judge. And the reason why all of this went down is because she had run into some serious debt problems and basically orchestrated this kidnapping to get the ransom money and pay off those debts in order to keep partying and keep being a socialite. Her trial began on January 25th, 1935, with Dr. Kelly identifying one of Meunch's friends as one of his kidnappers. Meunch, however, arrived at the trial holding a newborn baby, calling it a gift from God in my time of distress. And then, because newborn mothers could apparently do no wrong, Meunch was acquitted of all the charges and let go. And while the acquittal was a surprise, since everybody knew she had orchestrated this entire kidnapping and everything, the baby was an even bigger surprise because no one had actually known that she had ever been pregnant. Because again, she's a socialite. She's always out, always being seen at these parties and all these big events. you would think, especially in the 1930s, I mean, pregnancy is a big deal all the time, everywhere. But 1930s, you're still kind of maybe gonna die when you're giving birth. So like everybody's, got their eye on you probably, right? And so this whole time, especially as the trial's coming up, everybody knows all about this. This whole year, right? Because the case, she was revealed as the perpetrator in 1934. The trial starts in early 1935. So that whole time, people knew her trial was coming up, and then they should have also known that she was pregnant. But she wasn't? Or was she? No, she wasn't. She wasn't pregnant at all. She had actually paid a struggling 19-year-old maid $50 for her baby. And unfortunately for Muench, the maid then had second thoughts about selling her baby and sued Muench for the right to get the baby back. So silly. This revelation that Muench had not actually been pregnant and had tricked the courts then brought a long list of new charges against her. The baby was returned to its actual mother, who apparently faced no charges for having illegally sold that baby in the first place, which is weird. Here's what's crazy. That baby wasn't even the first one that Muench had bought or adopted. They say adopted. She bought it. The first baby had died of a disease first. So then Muench got the second baby and actually dyed this baby's hair red to make it look more like hers, because Muench was a redhead. So stupid. So at the next trial, right? So again, next trial was declared a mistrial because there was a bribery attempt on a juror. And then in the next trial attempt, Nellie was caught lying, saying that a Dr. Ralph Williams had been her attending physician, even though this guy had been dead for 14 years. Crazy. This dude named Pitzman, I think that's the only name given to him, or Marsh Pitzman, sorry. So Marsh Pitzman, another doctor, thought that he was the father of the child, right? He didn't even know that Muench had sold this kid. He thought he was the father of the child, and that Nellie had extorted $16,000 from him to keep it all quiet. Instead, she had actually attempted to get as much as $200,000 from this guy. And in the 1930s, that's a crazy amount of money. Muench's husband actually ended up getting 8 years in prison at Leavenworth for being an accomplice and helping Nellie do all of this stuff. Nellie got 10 years in prison, and then everybody just kind of went back to their normal lives. So just a crazy, silly little, socialite story there. Moving on to the Freedomites, which was this movement that began in 1902 in Saskatchewan, Canada, eventually migrating over to British Columbia, where they then split from the Doukhobors, which was this group of ethnic Russian Orthodox Christians. The Freedomites spoke and conducted their worship services in Russian. They opposed land ownership, so they were really more like, a commune sort of thing. They opposed public schools and using animals for work. So they're a fun group. Even stranger, they felt that the most effective way to stage a protest was to do so completely naked. Sure. According to their beliefs, human skin was more perfect than clothes, since God created skin and then humans created clothes. And sure, if you want to get super literal about that, fine. And again, I don't know that you're going to find a lot biblically to argue that. Granted, the Bible doesn't say that humans are perfect, so I don't know. It's weird, whatever. You can make anything say what you want it to say. Although the Canadian government was initially tolerant of the Freedomites' views, even the naked protesting thing, tensions developed over their belief on schools and land registration. Because again, Freedomites, they don't believe in public schools. They don't believe in owning land, but they were occupying this land. And the Canadian government was like, oh, you guys must own this, so you should probably pay taxes on it, right? And the Freedomites were like, no, we don't own land. We're just working it, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how they justified it. So The Freedomites, they refused to send their children to the public schools. And so the Canadian government, despite recommendations from sociologists, began criminally charging parents for their refusal and not sending their kids to school. In response, the Freedomites staged naked public protests where they burned their money and possessions all, again, out in the nude. And so starting in 1953, the Canadian government began Operation Snatch to finally fix this problem with the Freedomites. Over the next 6 years, roughly 200 Freedomite children were forcibly removed from their homes by multiple government agencies and sent to an internment camp, not to school, but to an internment camp in the town of New Denver, British Columbia. Following governmental raids on various towns, the Freedomites tried fighting back naked by attempting to detonate bombs on public schools, transportation, and communication infrastructure, and even their own properties. Although most of the attacks did not do anything, they ended up failing. Some attacks, however, were successful. Freedomites, mostly against themselves, Freedomites were killed by their own bombs in 1958 and 1962, presumably because bombing anything with your boobs and wieners out is exponentially more dangerous. That's really why clothes are important. It keeps your boobs and wieners from getting blown off when you go and bomb something. And I think, God was probably onto something when, he was maybe encouraging Adam and Eve to wear clothes, or however it came about. You get it. Another naked attacker successfully bombed a railroad bridge in the town of Nelson in 1961. The Canadian government, which again, you think the Canadian government, oh, sorry, bud, we're gonna just let you go out and be naked there. Just come on, send your kids to our school or something. I don't know. But no, the Canadian government responded to these attacks by seizing Freedomite land and possessions, which didn't really seem to bother them since those sorts of things went against their religion and they probably didn't think they owned them anyway. However, what really bothered the Freedomites was the seizure of their children, get it, and the arrests for public nudity. Which, if you can't be nude in public, that's the law. You should, probably expect that. Despite government retaliation, the Freedomites continued to protest naked. As time went on, the Canadian government kind of softened their stance and came to various agreements with the Freedomites, mostly because they were tired of just seeing so many naked people running around. But in 1982, after 30 years of arsons and bombings by this group, the British Columbian government organized a committee to look into improving relations with these Freedomites. In 1999, a government-sponsored report called for a formal public apology to the Freedomites and made a few recommendations for reconciliation. So the following year, in 2000, the Law Commission of Canada completed a study on the alleged institutional child abuse that had taken place in the internment camps in New Denver because, of course, that was happening, right? So the Canadian government took these kids out of their homes, put them in internment camps, and then subsequently abused them. Shocker. So they did a study on these, on the alleged child abuse that had taken place in these camps, and recommended that the provincial government, quote unquote, correct the historical wrongs in the best interest of Canadian society. Now, no documented proof of abuse has ever been surfaced. And obviously, right, no government is going to openly come out and be like, yeah, we abuse these kids because, but there's, I guess a lot of the kids came out of there claiming they were abused. I don't know. However, the Canadian government, despite all of these recommendations, only issued a statement of regret in 2004 and did not, and still, by all accounts, has not formally apologized for its role in the conflict. By all accounts, the Freedomites are still around. There's still about 2,500 of them out and about today, probably still naked whenever they're mad about stuff, mostly still out in, Western Canada in British Columbia. So if you're ever out that way, go find yourself some naked people, I guess. I don't know. Canada. Last story here. I mentioned this last week. This is probably one of the more famous kind of urban legends, paranormal, quasi-paranormal stories, like when you first kind of start to get into this is one of the first stories that often pops up. And it's like, oh, it's undeniable proof of a time traveler or people from other dimensions or whatever. And I don't know. We'll see. So, on a hot July day in 1954, this seemingly normal Caucasian man walked into the Tokyo airport. When authorities checked his passport, his country of origin read Taured, which definitely did not exist. Taured. Taured? I say Taured. Not a real place, right? That place, as far as being a country, has never existed. Authorities realized this and questioned the man and asked him to point to Taured on a map. Guy grabs a map and happily points to a spot between Spain and France that was labeled as the Principality of Andorra, which Andorra, definitely a real place. However, when he sees that it's Andorra and not Taured, he gets visibly upset and doesn't understand why the map doesn't say Taured, claiming that the nation had existed for more than 1,000 years. So, customs officials then searched the man and found several bills from various European countries, none from Taured, and his passport had been stamped by numerous countries from around the world, including previous visits to Tokyo. Authorities then transported this man back to his hostel and kept 2 guards outside of his room while they attempted to figure everything out. The man gave them the name of his employer, several documents with the company's letterhead, but then when customs officials called the company, the representative that answered claimed that the company had never heard of him and that he did not exist in their employment records. Authorities then inquired to the hotel where the man was staying and were informed that there was no reservation for him anywhere in the system. Officials then got in touch with the company that that this guy claimed he was in Tokyo to do business with, and they denied having any record of his visit. Even more, when authorities then went back to his hotel room to retrieve him, he was gone. There was no evidence that he had jumped out of the window, and the room was so high up that he would not have survived that fall anyway. And then this dude was never seen again. And all of those details became this story, and it slowly kind of started spreading around the world. A lot of people taking it as absolute truth that a time traveler had somehow wormholed himself into 1950s Japan and also couldn't figure out how he had gotten there or why he was there. However, as with most things paranormally related, there were very logical explanations as to what happened. So, on July 29th, 1960, a debate in the British House of Commons on immigration briefly focused on a man named John Allen Zegras, who at the time was being prosecuted by Japan for using a false passport. Zegras claimed that he was an intelligence agent and a naturalized citizen of Ethiopia. He had a heavily stamped passport from his travels, which was written in a strange language that a lot of people did not recognize. Even more, the passport was issued in Tamanrasset, which was the capital of the independent sovereign state of Taured. Now, spelled slightly different, right? So in the original story, the alleged country was spelled Taured. This sovereign state was spelled Tuarid. And Japanese officials had grilled John Allen Zegras over whether or not Taured was a real place. Zegras claimed that it was a state of 2 million people in the southern Sahara Desert. Japanese officials did not buy this and sentenced Zegras to a year in prison for illegally entering Japan and posing as an FBI and CIA agent. Following his sentencing for this, Zegras stood up and slashed his arms with a piece of broken glass that he had been hiding in his mouth. Somehow, despite several news articles from Japan in 1960 telling the actual story of what happened, all of those details about John Allen Zegras are conveniently left out, leaving many people to continue to believe instead that a mystery time traveler showed up at the Tokyo airport in 1954 from another dimension or something. Instead, the truth was that a con man had traveled the world on a fake passport and had eventually gotten caught. There you go. Weird fun bag number 21 in the books. And just to kind of wrap up, like give you some more context for the Man from Taured story. There is no actual sovereign state of Taured in Africa. There is a Taured meteor shower, which happens every so often, every year, I think. The other sort of close relation to this story and probably where this dude made it up, there are the Tuareg people, Tuareg people, the Tuareg people. They live in the Saharan desert, mostly in Mali, but also in Burkina Faso, Libya, Algeria, Mauritania, Nigeria, and Niger. And they're just kind of a nomadic tribe, mostly Islamic, indigenous descendants of the indigenous Berber communities in northern Africa. But, again, just kind of, nomadic in the Saharan desert. And so, this dude, Zegrid or whatever his name was, like, he just made all that up. He was a con man. And how he, and again, the story just ends with him disappearing. I don't know. No one knows what actually happened to him because it's just kind of how the story ends. But it's clear that they ended up catching him because he got sentenced to a year in prison for illegally entering Japan with a fake passport and all these fake stamps and everything, right? And so the problem is that, and again, it's prevalent in internet culture where a story that is, based on a true story, and there are true elements of it, in very important details that bring closure to the story or anything like that, get taken out, whether on purpose or just because people are stupid. And this new version, which may have these fantastical elements of it that may become paranormal or supernatural or whatever the case is, that's where that story then gets life. And people who otherwise wouldn't be interested in it suddenly get interested in it. And then the ignorance and the stupidity just grows. And more people latch onto it, not understanding that there's more to the story that's been missed. And it's just a frustrating part of life, at least for me. I don't know, maybe most people don't care about it, but it really bothers me when so many people are just living their life not realizing how wrong they are about everything, but also just being okay with how wrong they are, or being okay with not knowing how wrong they're. Anyway, that's beside the point. Let's recap this episode and see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number 1, Nellie Meunch, wealthy socialite, married to a doctor, doing all the doctor rich people things in St. Louis, and then got into a lot of debt and wanted to maintain her lifestyle. So she, orchestrates this kidnapping of another doctor and then shows up at her trial with a baby that she had bought, which was the second baby that she had bought. And anyway, ended up going to prison for 10 years because everybody kind of figured it out. But just a crazy story there. Number 2, Freedomites. Are they a cult or just kind of a quasi cult, I guess? Don't believe in land ownership. Don't believe in public schools. Don't believe in wearing clothes when you're mad at the government. And the Canadian government, as nice as they are, they don't take too kindly to people who like to be naked and not send their kids to public schools, apparently. And so snatched up a bunch of kids, put them in internment camps rather than just sending them to school. And then maybe there was abuse, maybe there wasn't, but just kind of a dark piece of Canadian history that a lot of Canadians just don't like to talk about. And then number 3, the Man from Taured. If you run into anybody who believes that this dude was a real time traveler, smack him in the face and let him know that, no, that's not true. It was just a guy named John Allen Zegris who was a con man and he got caught. That's it. Pretty simple.
What did we learn?
Next week on Our Weird World, we are one episode away from 300, and we are talking about one of my favorite silly groups of people again. We're going to go with part 3 with an episode on Mormons, and it's going to be a good one. All right, we got a doozy. 3 stories from the Mormon community with Emmanuel David, Jeffrey Lundgren, and James Harmston. Because Mormonism, silly people. That's it. We're gonna end it there. I think this baby's about to explode with crying, not literally. You get it. But that's it. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends, and keep it weird.
This is a podcast